Hello everybody and welcome to the channel. If you're new here, please click on like and subscribe. If you've been here before, welcome back. Today we'll be building a desk out of this little pile of lumber here. I've got an extra 4x4 here just in case. I don't really have this drawn out. I'm just going to kind of wing it based off of what I want out of the desk. And I did buy a pre-formed farmhouse bench top. I can make a bench top, but this one was on sale, so I bought it just to save me a little bit of work. It wasn't in real bad shape, but there's a couple places on the side of it. You can see where the plastic's ripped off, a couple little dents and dings in it. So basically I just took it to a store manager. They took 10% off of it. I got 5% off with my Lowe's card, so I got a pretty good deal on it. So once again, starting with my lumber, we're going to use two 4x4s and we're going to use a 2x10x10. And I'm going to cut all my pieces out of that one 2x10x10. Should have a little bit left over at the end. Now I'll also be cleaning up a lot of these boards, making them smaller, straightening them out, and putting new edges on them. Since it's a farmhouse table, you do not have to clean up the wood like I'm cleaning it up. Do that if you want, but again, you don't have to if you're building a farmhouse table. So the first thing I want to do is nip the tip off the board. I want to get rid of the factory cut. I know my saw is 90'd out, so I want to make sure I get a nice straight cut on the end since we're making a table or something that stands up. If we're off a little bit, we don't want to lean into it. Next thing, I'm going to make my legs 28 inches. That'll leave me 1.5 inches from my top, and I'm going to put feet on there so my feet will be able to raise it up a little bit more. Basically mark it off, cut on the outside edge of your line, not the inside edge, so you get the right cut. And then proceed on with 4 other pieces. So basically we're going to line them up. I'm going to square them out here at the end. Take my pencil, mark across the line, slightly inward on the board, and then I'm going to cut flush with that line. And that should give us 4 even 4x4s when we get done with it. Now after we get these cut, I want to make sure that they're straight on the end and make sure they're all the same exact length. Again, if you're off a little bit, your table's going to wobble, your legs are going to wobble. So I'm using a nice straight edge here on one side. Once I get this edge straightened, I'm going to put a clamp on there, go to the other side and check it. If there's anything off, make any adjustments you need to make sure you're nice and straight across there. After that, we're going to take the saw and we're going to take the edges off of the 4x4s. I'm going to actually make my legs 3x3. So 4x4 is 3.5 by 3.5, so I'm just cutting off the outside edge of it so I got a nice straight line. And making a special appearance while we're recording, not paying attention to what's going on around her, is my wife. She also has a YouTube page. I'll link the description to her page down below if you want to check it out, see what kind of videos she does. And she gets upset when I interrupt her videos. So here we are, again, just skinning off the outside edge of that. And we're going to do it on 2 sides of the 4x4. So basically 2 rough edges of the 4x4. Not the same side twice, of course. And then we'll have 2 flat edges on each 4x4 when we get done with it. I think you get the idea. I'm going to basically not record every single piece of this, so this video would be 4 hours long. Basically repeat this on all 4 of your legs. After that, we're going to finish cutting our legs down to 3 inches. So again, we've got 2 clean sides on each 4x4. I'm going to set my saw to 3 inches to the outside edge of the wood. And I'm going to run these all through. Now we should run them through 2 times each board. And those extra planks you get off there are really good for making crates with. If you like to make little crates and things like that, little Hobby Lobby type things. As you can see, we've got 3x3x3 on each one of these legs. So we'll have 4 even legs that are evenly dimensioned. So like I said at the beginning of the video, this is all optional. You do not have to cut these boards down to where they're even. The 4x4s are rounded well. If you picked out good 4x4s, there's no cracks or splits or big knot holes or anything in there. You can leave them just like they are. Basically, I'm just cutting these down to 3 inches by 3 inches because I want them to look like that. And I'm going to go back and I'm going to put a 3/8 inch round over on them. So it's basically going to look exactly like the 4x4 did originally, except for now it'll be 3x3. Again, this is an optional step for you. I'm going to sandal these down, get the saw blade edges off of there, any marks or dings or nicks that I see that I want out of there. That way I can clean them up really well. They'll paint really well that way. But again, depending on how you're finishing it, what you're finishing it with, and what you want your look to look like, you don't have to do that. If you're going to distress the wood especially, there's no sense in cleaning it up and making it look nice and pretty and then take a hammer or something and beating it to death to make it look distressed. Now I am just using an 80 grit sandpaper on these, basically just to get the big stuff off of there. I'm not going to go any lower than that. I'm going to paint it. We're going to use a cabinet paint, so it should be perfectly fine with an 80 grit. After the sanding, we're going to go back, round over the edges like I said earlier, 3/8 inch round over on these. If you got one person there by yourself, you could clamp each one of these down. Luckily, there's two of us here today working. So basically, when my son routes these out, I'm going to hold them in place, or might flip it around, vice versa. And that way we get all the edges nice and straight. And while he's cleaning up a little bit, I'm just taking a hand sand and just sanding over the rounded over edges to make sure there's no little ripples in it. We're working on the front back supports now. There'll be one support in the front on the top, one in the back on the top, one on the bottom in the back, and then 4 supports on the side. So I'm measuring these off to my measurements. I'm doing 51 inches for my left to right on the front and back, and I'm doing 21 inches for my sides. That'll give me room to put a 30 by 60 inch tabletop on it, or desktop on it, and still have enough room to have a 1.5 inch overhang on both sides. We're now ripping the edge off of the 2x10s and the different lengths, same as we did with the 4x4s, just to get a nice straight edge on there. And then we'll be cutting 2-inch beams out of all these. So you want to make sure that you cut the edges off of your front and back and your sides at the same time. That way you get all your legs the same. You want to cut all your 2-inch boards at the same time so you don't have to readjust your saw. You might be off 1/8 of an inch, 1/16 of an inch, and it just doesn't look as good. So try to get all your cuts at one time that you need. So again, we're cutting the 4 side pieces out, and we're going to cut out 3 pieces for the front and the back. Now I've sped this up the best I could. You can't please everybody on YouTube. Some people want to actually see the cuts. Some people don't care about seeing the cuts because they know how to cut wood. So I've kind of left a part of it in there. I've cut a little bit of it out. But overall, we want to end with 3 pieces for the front and the back, 4 pieces for the sides. And again, same thing as I did earlier, sanding them down, rounding over the edges on them so they look better. Don't have to do this if you don't want to. This is definitely going to add some time to your project. I'm making this desk for myself, so I'm taking a little bit of extra time and making it right, or finishing everything the way I want it to. Shouldn't say it that way. I want everything to be right. But if you were trying to mass produce this and sell it, you already don't have enough time to stop and sand every little piece, round every piece back over again and get it perfectly straight. This is basically a rinse and repeat of the other one. I'm just rounding over my edges. Now if you want to, on your sides, if you want to take a little more time and just round over the bottom parts and leave the top parts flat since they're going against the tabletop, you can. I just went ahead and rounded all 4 sides off, just faster and easier for me to do. Then I don't have to keep track of which board went where. I'm going to now mark the pieces where I need to put the pocket holes at. So I've got the bad boards turned upward, like with the big knot holes in them. Those will go up against my tabletop, whereas the other ones can go anywhere they want to. So I've marked the ends where the holes get drilled. I've marked the tops of the top of the board, and I've marked the insides of them. So if you got any bad wood, like those big knot holes you see, you can turn them on the inside of your project. So I'm going over to the pocket jig here. Actually, my son's going over to the pocket jig, drilling holes. Basically 2 holes on each end of the back on the bottom, on both sides on the bottom. The 4 top pieces will have 2 holes on each end, and then they'll have holes for the top, depending on if you're making your own top. If it's got a little bit of a warp or a bow to it, you can put more holes in it to hold it down more securely. If you're doing a pre-formed piece of board, or if you're doing a butcher block, you won't need to do anything like that. The block should be pretty straight and even as it is. So when you're doing your top holes, you see we've got a couple little spacers in there. If you just put your board into your jig, and like if you're using a Craig, when you clamp it down, you're going to shoot the screw or shoot the drill right through the top of it. So you want to put a couple spacers in there to get your board to where it actually drills to where it should. You want to leave at least 3/4 of an inch to 1 inch on that board without piercing into the face where you can actually see it at. We have multiple bits for the jig, so basically I set 1 to the top holes, and then I set 1 for the end pockets. That way we don't have to keep switching them back and forth or adjusting the pilot drill every time you want to do it. We're going to roll on the paint now. Now this again is optional. If you want to put it together first and paint it, you can. We're basically going to pre-paint it, but not paint the ends of the boards. And then once we get ready to assemble it, we will take a little Dremel or some sandpaper and make some small marks on there. We are screwing this in with pocket screws or wood screws anyhow, so it's probably not going to fall apart, but that extra glue just helps hold everything together, especially when you get to the crosses, because the crosses are mostly decorational. They're not really there for a lot of support. So a little bit of glue here and there helps keep it in place. I'm using a Valspar cabinet paint, baseboard and cabinet paint. Seems to be a little bit more durable. It's oil-based, and we're using the sponge roller so it goes on nice and smooth, doesn't leave the paint lines in there. Depending on what you're doing, you may want the paintbrush lines in there. You may want to look a little bit more farmy or antique-y. So you can also put an undercoat under there, like if you want to put a black or a brown under there, if you were going to distress it. You could paint them with a black or brown first, roll the white over top of it, and then go back and scratch it up and distress it later. So a couple hours later, paint's dry. We're ready to start assembling this. Make sure your paint's all dry. You don't want to get fingerprints all over it. You want to be careful putting it together. You don't scratch it all up. You will probably have to do some touch-up painting after you're done, though. So I'm going to do my end pieces first. I've stood 2 boards up. I've actually stood all 4 boards up just so I've got a basic layout of what I'm going to do here. As you can see, I took a straight edge, put it along the bottom, made sure my feet were straight across from each other. I took the 4x4s at the top and marked the middle of them. And then I marked the middle of my top support beam also. That way I can see where I'm at. Now I'm doing this one by myself to show you, if you're by yourself, how to do it. A little bit easier than trying to hold it in place, clamp it, glue it. If you take a couple small clamps like I'm doing here, put them about where you think it needs to be. Clamp those on there, then you can rest your piece on top of there while you're getting the clamp in place. You snug up your top clamp, and then you can kind of adjust those where you need them at. Again, keeping in mind that your feet at the bottom need to be straight. If you get those torqued out, you'll end up with a wobble on your table, or when you go to do your crosses at the end, you'll notice that they're not square. So that base piece just kind of helps keep me square while I'm working. Now before I clamp this, at the bottom you can see I inserted the bottom piece just to keep it straight. Again, everything is double checked, triple checked. I've lined up my boards, I've clamped them down tight. And again, I've got the piece at the bottom just to keep the bottom legs from either flaring out or bowing inward, so I don't have any deflection in the wood, and I'm not creating any stress anywhere I don't need it. Once I get that in, using wood screws on here. You can use pocket screws if you want to. Wood screws is just cheaper for me to buy in bulk than trying to find pocket screws all the time. Bottom, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just using a 4x4 at the bottom, which is 3.5 inches tall, to get my first piece in alignment here. I can use that, support it, clamp it, flip it over, and double check my measurements with a tape measure. And I'm also using a square, which I kind of cut off there with the camera. You'll see it on the other side. Making sure my legs are square at the bottom. You don't want to be rolled up. And don't just check one side, check both sides to make sure they're square. Now I have it pre-drilled into the 4x4, so I'm running the screws in and out, back and forth a few times just to help them go down in there without splitting the wood out. You don't have to do that. Some people put WD-40 on them. And now, like I said, with 2 people, this goes together a lot easier than with 1, but you can do it by yourself if you need to. It's a lot easier if you got someone helping you measure, tap things in place. And as you can see, the Rottweiler likes to get her nose involved in it too. She likes playing with the shadows more than anything. Today we're just making a big family project out of it and have to have a little bit of playtime in the middle of everything, and then we're back to work again. So we're basically going to repeat this process on the other side, and then we're going to do the same thing on the front and the back. Except for at the front and the back, we're going to do the top and the bottom on the back side. Measuring the center of my boards here, measure the center of my 4x4s, make sure I'm lining them up perfectly. If you want to push these to the flush side where they're flush with the outside or inside, or maybe you wanted to make them 3 inches wide where they go from side to side, entirely up to you. This is just my design plan, how I wanted my desk to look. Now the only reason I clamped the front of this one on both sides, I don't know if you saw much because I fast forwarded through it, but it is wobbly because all the clamps are on one side, so all the weight's on the other side of it, so it just basically tries to fall over. So I put a clamp on both sides just to balance it out easier, to make it easier to screw in. Check all my corners again, make sure I'm 40 or 90 degree on everything, nice and even. If you're not, make some adjustments, fix it, screw it in place. Front and back here, I did a terrible job with the camera. One of us must have bumped it. I thought I had it lined up where you could see, but we're basically doing the same thing. Both of us are holding it in place, measured the center of it, clamped it down there. There we moved the camera so you can see again. I put the front piece in. As you can see, I've got 2 supports under there holding it together, again, just to keep us from flexing in and out while we're doing the top pieces. After we get the 2 top pieces in, we'll do the bottom and the back. Since I just used a rough 4x4, it hadn't been cut or anything like that, I'm still going to use the 4x4s in the back to support our work while we're putting it together. but this may be off just a little bit depending on where it is on there. So I'm still doing a measurement from the top down to the top of the board on our fixed board already that we know the distance of, and then wrapping it around to measure the other one out. May have to adjust it slightly, but just make sure you're same from the top to the bottom on the back as you are on the side. Once we get it about where we want it, we're using the small clamps again to hold up the brace. And we're still going to clamp this. You want to clamp this, especially if you're not going to glue it, because you don't want the screw to push away from the wood. You want to keep it nice and tight so when the screw draws in, it draws the wood nice and tight also. Again, you can take some sandpaper and sand those edges down and glue it if you want to. I'm not going to do it on this, but I am going to do it on the crosses. So that's the frame pretty much done. We'll start working on the top now. We'll come back to the cross a little bit. I do have a full video on how to do these crosses and how to measure them. I didn't really go through it on this video because it's already getting too long. But I'll tell you what my dimensions were on these when I cut them when I get to that point in the video. So I want my desk to be 60 inches long and 30 inches wide. So I know my fence on my skill saw is 1.5 inches. So basically I'm going to take 1.5 inches off the 60. I'm going to clamp my straight edge on there on both sides, double check, triple check the measurements, and then run your skill saw across and get your nice flat edge on the end. Don't push it through too fast. Make sure you got something to support it so it doesn't just fall off and break something out. If you buy this farmhouse top, it is a little brittle. You can get some tear outs and some blowouts on the end. So just make sure you take your time. And again, everybody's favorite part, make a line on there, sand it down. I don't know which side I want up first. I think I'm going to put the other side up because I don't really like all the knot holes, but depends on how they finish out. I may use this side for my top or my bottom. But either way, I want to knock the big edges off of it right now. We're going to round the corners off now. We've got a squared off piece of ply here, just an extra piece of wood left over. I put it on our other router and we rounded it off to a 30-degree angle. That way our plunge router will fit on top of this. We're just going to take our plunge router, put it on the top, and round the corners off. Now when you go to round these off, make sure you look at the grain of your wood. If you go backwards against the end grain, you're going to blow it off. So you want to come up the side of the board and around the corner, and don't try to take too much off at one time. If you take too much off at one time, you might actually get a tear out also. So just take your time, a little bit at a time. If you want to take a saw, jigsaw or something and round it off, you can. And then I'm just sanding off the edges. So do that on all four corners. We're going to take a 3/8 inch round over bit and just go around the table, just to round over the edges, make it a little bit smoother. Once we get done with that, we're going to take a little bit of sandpaper again and just sand them in case there's any burrs or blemishes on there. So we're getting ready to do our crosses on the ends of the table. I'm going to make these out of 1.5 by 1.5 wood. We're going to tear these down just like we did the others. We're going to smooth off the side of the board and then cut 1.5 planks out of it. So again, ripping off the rough edge. And I'm just guesstimating on this. I measured from corner to corner. I've got a video online how to do the angles on these. Since my box is pretty squared on the end, I'm just going to start with a 45-degree angle and nip it back and cut it into where it fits good. So we ended up pretty close. It was about a 43.5-degree angle on the bottom of each side. So at least we were square. Crosses are in place. Again, we sanded a little bit around the bottom and top where the paint was just to get some wood glue on them because they're not supporting anything, but we don't want them to fall out. Getting ready to prep the top here. Just want to blow it off or clean it off however you can. You don't want anything in there before you stain it. We're also going to use a pre-stain on this, and I'll show you in just a second why the pre-stain works out for me. Not sure about everybody. Some people say you don't use it, some people use it. I always use the pre-stain, and I'll show you why in just a second. So I flipped the table over here. As you can see, around the edge, that's where the pre-stain was. That is 2 coats of stain on the board on both sides. So the really dark edge is 2 coats of stain. The light one is 2 coats of stain. One just has the pre-stain on it. So if you want a nice darker board, use the pre-stain. Back to the top again, just applying the stain, work it down in each little groove. Let it dry for however long you want, 12 hours, 24 hours. Come back and apply the next coat to it. Also make sure you go back about 15 minutes later and wipe off all your excess stain. If not, it becomes a gummy, sticky mess that you don't want to try to clean up, or it will just ruin your top. Next day, with our second coat of stain on here, we're ready to put the poly on it. We also went ahead and painted the crosses on the end of the base, so the base is ready to go. Last thing to do to the base will be put the feet in, and we'll do that in just a second. I'm going to put a coat of polyurethane on here now. And again, this is another one of those things that people want 1 coat, 2 coats, 3 coats. Do whatever you want. I'm going to do 2 total. I'm going to brush it on, let it sit overnight, put the next coat on it, and then I'll have to light sand it to get any flakes out of it or anything that settles. We're using a garage to do this in, so it's not the cleanest environment, so I will have some settlement in mind. If you're in a nice clean shop, you probably won't have to do that. So I want to put legs on this table. I'm going to mark the center of my 4x4s, which are now 3x3s. So at 1.5 inches and 1.5 inches, and then I'm going to take a drill bit, run it down in the type of feet I've got, have little anchors that go down in the wood, and you just screw the foot down into it so you can raise and lower those feet. Just make sure that your screw hole's deep enough that your foot fits all the way down in when it's all the way in. Also take a shop vac or turn your table over and get the rest of the remaining sawdust out of there. Here we are on day 3. This has been sitting for a good 24 hours. I used a warm semi-gloss on there, as you can tell by the shininess. I'm not sure that I like the semi-gloss as well. I kind of like more of a satin, but it's okay. It doesn't look as bad in person as it does with the light reflecting on it. And again, I've just got some light flecks in the top of it. I'm using a 320 here and just knocking the light little flecks off of it that stuck to the poly. The last thing I want to do to the top is put some wax on it. I'm just using beeswax here. I think it's wax and feed. Kind of like waxing a car. Once you put it on there, wait about 5 or 10 minutes, and then just take a microfiber towel or something and buff it off of there. It's pretty much the obvious part. Sliding the top onto the base. Once I get the top on the base, I'm going to take a small piece of wood that's 1.5 inches. You can actually use a tape measure or a ruler or whatever you want. I want this to be 1.5 inches overhang on all the sides. So I'm going to walk around and get it squared off to where it's ready to screw down. Now once I get to this point, I'm going to clamp this to the base. That way when I'm putting the screws in from the bottom, I don't push the wood up off of the top. It also helps me keep it in nice straight positioning. That way I don't move it around while I'm underneath the table trying to put the screws in. I'm just going to use a 2-inch wood screw since my top's 1.5 inches, and I know I've got at least 3/4 of an inch for my pocket holes. I'm not worried about going through the top. If you're a little bit shallower on your pocket holes, you can use an 1.5 inch screw if you want to, just to keep you from blowing through the top of the table. And it'll also get rid of any warp. If you have a small warp or anything in your top, it'll help draw it out. And I'm starting in the middle on both sides, and I'm going to work my way down both sides. So I'm going to do the middle first, and then I'm going to work my way down to the left a little bit, back to the right a little bit, and do the same on the front, and then crisscross back and forth, working my way to the end of the table. And as usual, my supervisor is sitting right there making sure that I'm doing everything correctly. So the last thing I'm going to do is take the clamps off, do a quick wipe down, make sure there's nothing else on there, address any paint or anything that would need to be touched up, which luckily I don't have. Hope this video helped you out. Please click on the like, subscribe, drop a comment below, let me know what you think about it. Let me know if you think I did something wrong. If you learned something new, just let me know what you think about it overall.